Okay, welcome to the third and final part of the Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programs Legislative Advocacy Series. My name is Laela, Kashan, she, her pronouns, and I am the staff attorney for KASAP. That's what we call the organization for short. KASAP's mission is to speak with a unified voice against sexual victimization. We are the coalition for Kentucky's 13 regional sexual assault support programs, also known as rape crisis centers. Our programs serve all 120 counties in the Commonwealth. They offer support services for individuals who have been sexually assaulted or abused, as well as support for friends and family members of those individuals. In addition to intervention and response services, our programs provide primary prevention education because ultimately we want to see less people harmed so that they never need to seek our services to begin with. If you missed parts 1 and 2 of the series, where we reviewed the basics of the Kentucky legislative process, tips to engage in the process, and public policy agendas from the sexual assault and abuse field, including our own, be on the lookout for them to be uploaded to the KASAP YouTube page. Part 3 is also being recorded and will be included. So a couple of housekeeping notes. Closed captioning is available. It's showing up right now, but if you don't see it or if you want to turn it off, there should be a CC button at the bottom of your screen. It also says live transcript, and you can modify closed captioning for yourself there. Feel free to send any questions in the chat, and if we have time at the end, we may address them. And additionally, any inappropriate comments will cause a person to be removed. Now you can follow KASAP through Twitter at NoMoreKY, on Facebook at KASAP Inc. That's KASAPINC. You can find out more at our website at www.kasap.org. And you can find our YouTube channel at KY of Sexual Assault Programs Inc. And I'm going to put all of that in the chat. And you can also find support services in your area as an individual who's been sexually assaulted or abused, or as a loved one, through the 24/7 support line at 1-800-656-HOPE. And you can find a map of our local programs through this link that I'm adding in the chat as well. And the last thing I'll say about the programs is that you can contact them to learn about volunteer opportunities and to find out if they have an advisory group of survivors. Several of our programs have that now, and you can find out if there's one in your region. And then the final things to add in the chat for now are links to KASAP's public policy position document, that's our general one, as well as a link to the National Survivors Agenda. And these are just things for you to take home and maybe look at later, so save those links on your own. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our rock star panel and express gratitude to everyone for joining tonight. So tonight we have Senator Julie Raque Adams, who is the Senate Majority Caucus Chair. Senator Adams has been in the legislature since 2011, serving both in the House of Representatives and now in the Senate since 2015. Then we have Senator Reginald Thomas, who is the Senate Minority Caucus Chair, who's been in the legislature since 2014. We also have Representative Joni Jenkins, who is the House Minority Floor Leader, who's our longest running legislator on our panel today, serving since 1995. And our newest up and coming members are Representative Samara Heavrin. She is the co-chair of the Commission on Race and Access to Opportunity, serving in the House since 2019. And finally, we have Representative Nima Kulkarni, who's also been serving in the House since 2019. So thank you all for being here with us. Each of you have sponsored, co-sponsored, voted in favor of, and or advocated on issues important to survivors of sexual assault and abuse. And so to center us, as we dive into the questions tonight, I'd like to share a few data points. 39% of women and 18% of men in Kentucky reported that they were sexually assaulted at some time in their life. This is slightly higher than the national average. Racial, ethnic, and sexual minority groups are disproportionately impacted by sexual harm. 21.6% of Kentucky students who were sexually assaulted at high school attempted suicide. 40% of Kentucky women entering as freshmen in college reported being raped or sexually assaulted during their teen years. And this was also correlated or played out with them having lower GPA scores and lower grades during that freshman year. Survivors of sexual violence are at a greater risk for trauma-related health problems, including depression, PTSD, suicidal ideation, sleep disorders, and eating disorders. And KASAP sexual assault support programs serve over 5,000 survivors and their loved ones each year, and we've seen an increase in requests for services in the past year of about 14%. Okay, so now that we're all in the same space, let's get started with our first question, and we're going to go in order of the introductions for this first question response. So panelists, please share with us what brought you to agree to participate in this panel. In other words, why do you think it's important to address policy issues that will both prevent and respond to the public health crisis of sexual assault and abuse? So Senator Julie Raque Adams, if you could kick us off. Oh, let me see. Oh,
I was on mute.
go.
Check. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for including me on this very important panel. It's really an honor to be here and, to share some time with you tonight. Really, I guess the reason is that I'm wanting to participate are the reasons you stated in the opening, and that unfortunately sexual assault and abuse occurs across all ages, races, sexes, and Kentucky consistently ranks among the worst in the nation for the substantiated cases of child abuse, domestic violence, and sexual assault, and all the other forms of abuse. And I take my role in the Senate very seriously. And I feel that this is my opportunity to participate, like in today's panel, to provide an opportunity to learn and elevate the importance of providing support and resources for victims of domestic violence and abuse, sexual assault and abuse. This is an opportunity for me to learn. It's an opportunity for me to carry back what I learned to the General Assembly and to translate that into real action so that we can help people all across the state who need it.
Great, thank you. And Senator Thomas, you're up next.
Thank you, Laela, for having this discussion and hosting it. It goes back to my mother. My mother was a social worker. And as a social worker, I would hear her come home and talk about the kinds of tragedies and wrongdoings and assaults imposed upon women, and how she felt their pain, and Mom had a lot of empathy and desire to see change in this area, and so I was very influenced by her, and that's one of the reasons why I'm in politics today, because I wanted to do something to make this world a better place to live, and again to assert protections to prevent abuses toward women. And so that's how I got involved in this. And having seen women from so many different roles, as a son, as a brother, as a husband, and as a father, this issue is very, very important to me. So that's how I became involved. And when these issues come up, Julie had a very important bill 2 years ago that dealt with bringing dignity to women in penitentiaries, and I'm sure she's going to talk more about that. And my own colleague, also Senator Harper Angel, has been the leader in addressing issues of rape and doing more to help women who are rape victims get their day in court. This is just such this issue, Laela. This issue never gets old, and we need to constantly talk about it because we have to bring attention to it, and one of these days we have to find a way just to stop this.
Yeah, we agree. It unfortunately it never gets old. We want it to get old though, which is why you all do the great work that you do. So Representative Jenkins.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to participate. I always learn a lot when we are on these kinds of panels. So I'm looking forward to that. And what a great way to share our ideas and hopes. Of course, when I was invited, I said, yes, this has been one of my passions for many years. When I first came to the General Assembly in 1995, I worked at the Center for Women and Families in the Rape Crisis Center and did public and professional trainings, but also responded to victims in the hospital emergency rooms. And what I learned from that experience is that sexual assault and the trauma follows people for it's a life-changing event for them. And so much of what we see in predominantly women is that it affects their education. It affects so many life decisions that they make. And it's becomes sometimes a baggage that they carry with them forever. So preventing that from happening is goal number one, but also making sure that we have a system that in responding to victims, we don't further traumatize them. One of the very first bills I passed was the Sane Nurse Bill. And that was a step from the very first interaction following a sexual assault. Let's treat those victims with dignity and professionalism. And that's one of the bills that I'm most proud of, I think, in my career. But there are still things, even after 27 years and having a lot of bills around this issue, there are still things that we need to do in Kentucky.
Yeah, thank you. We love that you bring that experience from working in one of the rape crisis centers. And in fact, you mentioned the SANE, there's at least one SANE on this event today. So wonderful. And moving on to Representative Heavrin.
Thank you all for having me. I told Laela I have a 6-month-old golden retriever who has a new toy. So if you hear a squeak or a bark, please forgive me. She is napping right now, but I'm afraid she'll be up at some point. Thank you all so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. It's an honor. This has been an issue. Sexual abuse, I think, as a young woman has been one of my biggest fears whenever I was in college, whenever, I feel like we're always very aware of our surroundings. And I've had conversations with people about it, and it's just not something that's fair. And I realize life isn't fair, but it's something that we shouldn't have that fear. And I feel like it's one of our biggest roles is, women and men, just to love on each other. And if we can help in traumatic instances, then we need to be able to do that. And I think as policymakers, we've got that opportunity to do that at a statewide level. And so I'm thankful for that. One of my first visits as a state rep once I got elected was to Silverleaf in Elizabethtown. I see Dr. Jillian Carden on the call or on the Zoom, and it was just really an eye-opening experience. And I remember going into one of the back rooms where they process the victims and kind of go through and everything. And tears came to my eyes, and just how traumatic that had to be, no matter what age you are. And I'm thankful that Dr. Carden has included me in conversations. Last session, I guess in this past session, I was able to carry Senate Bill 52 by Denise Harper Angel, which was the preventing sexual assault from peace officers. And we had one person from Northern Kentucky vote no on that bill. It really was a bipartisan issue, and I was so proud of that and Senator Harper Angel's work on that bill. So I'm just really gracious to be here tonight and to help. I love really civic engagement and encouraging people to advocate. I think that's such an important part of the legislative process, and I'm excited to be able to share with you all just some things to be helpful on that.
Great, thank you. And Representative Kulkarni.
Thank you for having me on. It's an honor, and I think one of the main reasons that I'm on here is, going back to some of the statistics you sort of framed this conversation around in the beginning, and really we all know somebody, whether it's a friend or a colleague or a family member, that has been victimized in this way, that is now a survivor. And as Rep. Heavrin said, as policymakers, we need to do whatever we can to support these individuals. As Representative Leader Jenkins mentioned, we don't want to re-traumatize them. I think this is an issue that cuts across race, it cuts across gender, it cuts across sexuality, national origin, and it's something that doesn't go away. It's something that people carry with them. And I know firsthand how difficult it is to deal with agencies and institutions that presume that you are not telling the truth, or where it's difficult to get documentation. I'm an immigration attorney, so there are specific visa types for victims of crime, victims of trafficking, victims of domestic violence, and it is really difficult to get that documentation and that evidence together for these individuals to be able to stay in this country and be safe and be able to be removed from the vicinity of their abuser, and children as well. And so one of the things that I'm very proud to co-sponsor a bill that is just going to a small piece, helping with employment benefits, unemployment insurance benefits for survivors of domestic violence. And it's not a huge bill, but it's one of these sort of gaps that we have in our system that we can fix as policymakers. And while we may not always understand the impact, we may understand the broad strokes, let me rephrase that, of the impact of sexual assault and violence, but we as policymakers also need to understand the nuances and make sure that nobody falls through the cracks, and that everybody feels supported and feels that their representatives are listening to them, and that they are trying to make their lives better in very fundamental ways.
Great, wonderful. Again, thank you all for being here. The next set of questions, though, are just kind of whoever wants to chime in. So if you want to chime in, just unmute yourself, I think, or maybe most people are unmuted. Just go ahead and chime in. If you want to raise your hand to chime in, feel free to do that, whatever you're comfortable with. But as you know, in part 1 of the series, we provided general tips about advocating for an issue, but we really want to hear from legislators about what you all think. So the next question is, what tips could you share for survivor constituents about contacting their legislators in the process, including maybe what not to do?
Can I go first?
Go for it.
Okay, I want to go first because I want to go back to something that I think is a really critical dynamic, that I think that each session takes on its own life. Like one session is not the same as another session that's the same as another session. And I think one of the most remarkable things about how sessions change and the flow is, I want to point out Joni Jenkins. Joni Jenkins truly has been the longest champion of all of these issues. I mean, I remember reading about her even before I even thought about running for office. But let me tell you, Joni Jenkins has been bringing these issues before the General Assembly for so many years. And so, depending on who's the leaders and who's doing this and who's doing what, do the issues make it to the forefront? And so there are so many things that we have passed in the last few years that were Joni Jenkins's. And so I remember saying to her, I'm like, do you want to do this? I know the Republicans are in control, but do you? And she said, no, Julie, just get it done. And let me tell you, that's a special human being to say, I don't want the credit. I just want it done. And so first of all, I just love her. And I want to shout out to Joni, because I just think she's truly a remarkable legislator, and she's been on the front lines forever. So that having been said, this dynamic that I think a lot of women in particular in the General Assembly feel, it's not partisan for us. It truly is just doing better by the people that we represent. And so when I see Representative Kulkarni and Representative Heavrin and Joni, I mean, you reach out to us. I mean, we're all normal people, and these forums are such a good way for you to kind of gauge us and understand our personalities and know that we're approachable. But when you're just start approaching us and tell us what you know, because I don't know what you know. I don't know what you've experienced. I don't know what you live. But when you tell me that, I can empathize and I can try to translate that into action. But I have to do a shout out to Joni because she's a rock star.
I didn't pay her to do that, I promise.
Thank you. And that is true. A lot of the issues that are still here today, Representative Jenkins has been leading that charge for many, many, many years. Would anyone else like to share some tips for constituent survivors who want to contact their legislators?
I would like to weigh in here because this is something that I think is very important, because I want to make sure if a survivor comes to me that I talk to them about their own comfort level in sharing something very, very personal and hurtful to them. So if someone comes to me, I try to set some boundaries for us to talk about what happened to them, and let them know that what they say to me is confidential, that I would never use their name without their permission. And if they should decide that they want to, as part of their survivor healing, to be public, I want to make sure that we have all the tools that we need to make sure that they do it in a way that's very safe for them. We had a colleague that disclosed on the floor of the House, and it was very powerful. But I will say that the women in the House kind of went to her and made sure she had what she needed to live with that. I mean, that was very public and very brave of her, but we were really in the next days and weeks making sure that she got what she needed. And, you know, survivors don't have to tell their story publicly if they don't want to, but being able to have that information, to be able to tell that anecdotal story with perhaps not a name at all attached to it, can be very powerful. Because I do think there are still people in the legislature that think that this is a very rare crime, that it doesn't happen very often. So being able to not only use statistics and the data, but also to put a face with it whenever possible. But I think as legislators, we have a duty to make sure that we do not re-traumatize someone. We all get traumatized enough in the General Assembly. We certainly don't want one of our constituents who's a survivor to live through that as well.
I would like to add too, it's hard to kind of follow up with Joni and Julie, but I think the big thing is, just relationships really matter, I think, with your legislators and local senators. I've got a great relationship with Dr. Cardin. She'll text me if issues come up. Having relationships like that is so important whenever you're working with your legislators. And I think also, and I hate to say it, but just being kind, with each other, with social media and the rhetoric at the national level for the past several years, it's been very difficult just to have cordial conversations sometimes. And just because we have an R or a D behind our name, it doesn't make us a different person. A lot of times I say, I realize I'm a Republican, but I don't care if you voted for me. If you didn't, I'm here to help you and love on you. And I feel like I hope my colleagues see that as well. But we're really here just to serve. And, our responsibility is to be the voice for the district that we serve. And, so if you call me an asshole, I'm probably not going to be as receptive of wanting to help, but it's still my duty. But just being kind, when I first got elected, there goes Rosie. When I first got elected, I remember the ACLU came to my office and they were like, we've never met with the 18th district before because your predecessor didn't allow that. And I was so disheartened because I was like, gosh, I represent everyone, whether, no matter what we believe. And I remember I said in that moment, I said the precedent. I'm really I'm embarrassed, but it's just Rosie. She says hello. She's very friendly. I said the precedent that sometimes there are going to be issues that we just don't agree on, but let's focus on what we do agree on, because that's a bigger percentage. Like some things are just like, not going to work. But even if you're respectful and just listen, we can still have really difficult conversations. And I saw something on Instagram a few weeks ago, and it said that comfort is a slow death. And that has really resonated with me in this season of life, because the more that we get comfortable, the less likely things are going to change. And so if we're able to get uncomfortable and have hard conversations, things are going to change. And so that's my little bit of advice.
Yeah, I love it. A couple of you all have said, basically, we're people too. And that was the title of a conference that Kentucky Nonprofit Network put on a couple of years ago, Legislators Are People Too. So sort of just remembering like that you all are the same as us. We should be able to reach out to you, but also treating you with dignity and respect, just as we want with ourselves. Representative Kulkarni, do you unmute yourself?
I did. And I just wanted to add on to that a little bit. The vast majority of the bills that I file come from constituents or constituent concerns. And so I think it's really crucial that regardless, as Rep. Heavrin mentioned, regardless of what the political ideology of your particular or party of your representative might be, that they are there to represent you. And so you need to know who they are. You need to form a relationship with them and tell them this is an issue that's important to me, whatever it might be, or this is a specific concern of mine or issue that something that happened to me and I need you to address it on a legislative level. And it is our job to listen to you. It is our job to make sure that your concerns are addressed. So don't be afraid of that. And don't ever think that you should not or cannot approach us with any of those concerns.
Great. Senator Thomas, anything to add?
I always have something to add, Laela. I'm rarely shy or speechless. I want to come at this from a different point, because there are always these issues that we have to tackle. One thing that we haven't specifically said, I think we need to address that women who are victims of sexual assault really experience a lack of self-esteem. That's a really detriment to their psyche that they have to deal with. And so we need to talk about in dealing with this, how we help them to overcome that. Many women, even in this enlightened age of 2021.
Hey, shut the fuck up.
I'm sorry, that was one of those things they say when people come in to your Zoom and they try to start stuff, that person has been removed. I apologize for the interruption.
Okay, that's no problem. That we need to assist women in knowing that this wasn't their fault, that they are not to blame, that we need to restore their self-esteem, their self-confidence. I think these are things that we really need to work on, Laela, as part of learning and growing and moving forward in this in this panel discussion, this conference. That's what I want to add to this discussion.
Great, thank you. One second, I made my screen full and I still need to see my notes. So now, there are many topics that intersect with and impact sexual assault and abuse, including social norms, economic stability, youth education, substance use disorder, discrimination, and funding for services at Rape Crisis Center. That is not an exhaustive list, just a few examples. We must address sexual assault and abuse comprehensively to reduce risk factors for perpetration, as well as increase protective factors. So the questions up next are, what issues or bills do you think will move in the 2022 session connected to the prevention of and or the response to sexual assault and abuse? And what barriers might there be to those bills moving? And this is whoever wants to go.
Well, I'll jump in right away. I've been thinking about this question, and I think one bill that we've filed for years and years that gets so much rhetoric around it is comprehensive sex ed. And some more conservative groups have taken I think a really untruthful way of characterizing this bill. As somebody who did that kind of work in the public schools when I worked for the Center for Women and Families, in teaching children age appropriately about their agency over their body and their rights to their body, and talking about consent and how you give consent, how you get consent. I would love to see us have some real honest dialogue about what comprehensive sex ed is for our public schools, age appropriate. I think it could go a long way in educating our young people about healthy relationships, healthy dating relationships, healthy family relationships. And I think we have many, many professionals across the state that can do this in a way that is non-judgmental, but very, very appropriate for life. So I would love to see that bill move forward.
Right. And thank you for bringing that one up. I will let folks know we recently created at KASAP. It's a 4-page handout, not a 1-page, but we wanted to get some really key information that highlighted some of the research that shows the connection between comprehensive health education and the prevention of sexual violence. So we do have that. It will be on our website soon. And if folks have questions about that, we are having those conversations, and thank you for lifting that up.
Yeah. And Laela, I'll add, as we're coming, I like to call it post-pandemic, because I really feel with the vaccine that we are now on the uptick of trying to get back to normal existence. But during quarantine and during COVID, we saw an uptick in basically everything negative, and that we didn't need to see an uptick in. And that is coupled with the real reality that Kentucky faces, that we have been first in the number, we've been rated first in child abuse and neglect for the last 3 years. And so if we're going to get real serious about how we're not number one in child abuse and neglect anymore, we're going to have to not only make policy changes, but we're also going to have to make funding changes. And these are priorities. And so when we look at our budget, we are going to, as a General Assembly, one of the things I'm working on is that we are going to have to commit from a policy standpoint, but more importantly, from a funding standpoint, that we are no longer going to accept this status as the #1 state for child abuse and neglect. Part of this is easy, like the policy part, so to speak, is easy. We can work on definitional changes. We can work on scopes of what groups work on, but we have to have that prevention piece, and we have to have that funding piece. And so I commit to every single person on this call, and that I will work with anyone in the legislature, that it is about time that we put our money where our mouth is, and we stop these statistics that Kentucky finds itself. We can do better and be better, but gosh, we have to spend the dollars.
Yes, we absolutely agree with that. And I think you gave me a segue to a plug for KASAP's prevention programming. As a part of our budget request, we are asking for additional funds for that prevention programming, so we can get ahead, even more ahead than where we've already been moving the state for the last decade. So, we do think funding and where it goes is very important, and we agree with that. Anyone else? What do you think is going to move, and what do you think might be the barriers?
So something I'm working on, and Laela, you've been part of this conversation as well. Something that we really fail at in Kentucky is being proactive rather than reactive. We're always reactive when we pass legislation for the most part. And at the end of last session, I was, scrolling through news, and I saw that in Minnesota, there was a Supreme Court case that was overturned. It was a rape case. And basically the victim, the woman, she was intoxicated by alcohol, and it caused the the case to be overturned. And it just really bothered me because I'm sitting here thinking, even if she was drunk, she didn't deserve to be raped. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to use allegedly and all that. But, you know, it was very concerning to me. And it was one of those things of like, okay, what can we do in Kentucky so that doesn't happen? Now, recognizing that Minnesota does have different laws than us, you know, I went to our judiciary staffers and I was like, all right, here's what's up. What can we change? And so we're still working on it. But one part of that, and I hope this passes this session, is that in our current statutes in KRS 510, we don't have alcohol as a list, as a current list of substances to the definition of physically helpless. Really, it's based on like date rape drugs. It doesn't include alcohol. And so my hope is just to add alcohol into that. So then we're covered. And, you know, it's a small change, but I think it's really a change that can help. And just kind of being proactive on that. And I think that's the most important thing. If we can, you know, just helping in the judicial area if that happens. So that's something I'm working on, and KASAP has been involved in that. And I greatly appreciate you all working on that.
Yeah, we appreciate you letting us know and asking for our input, because I think it will help some prosecutors understand how they can use the law in a way that is now written in statute versus just through case law. So it will be an improvement. Thank you. Anybody want to go next?
I just want to add really quickly, I think one of the things that I've been kind of keeping tabs on and will continue to keep tabs on is the programs that continue to be funded despite the Violence Against Women Act not being reauthorized. And I think part of that is something we as legislators need to make sure, again, doesn't fall through the cracks, because that is, you know, a measure that provides grants and resources to sexual assault programs, rape crisis centers, you know, comprehensive sex ed, anything like that. It also has provisions for training police officers in how to deal with sexual assault and domestic violence and abuse situations. And I think some of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Laela, but I think most, if not all of that, just continues to be funded by Congress, regardless of, you know, VOA not being reauthorized. But I think that's something I would personally be interested in making sure that none of those programs just somehow fall through the cracks or get lost in the shuffle because we don't have that federal parameter in place. And so that's something I think we should be able to look at on a state and local level moving forward, depending on what happens in Congress with that particular bill.
Yeah, I also love that because that reminds us that there are laws being changed that impact us in Kentucky on the federal level. So not only do we have to do our federal or our state level advocacy, we need to keep an eye on what's going on the federal level. And so these larger programs that we have that fund most of our support services for survivors and our prevention work, it's from federal funding. State funding we do have state funding for the programs, but it's a smaller percentage. And so we do need to make sure that our voices are being heard in our federal delegation as well.
And Laela, I think we would be remiss if Nima and I, neither one mentioned our unemployment bill. I know we mentioned at the beginning, but really hoping that passes in 2022. It's good bipartisan support. We've worked with the chamber on it. And really, you know, we testified and several of you all were there in committee when we testified. And, you know, I think it's brought up a lot of good conversation. I know among our caucus, even though you might not realize it, like it does happen and it's such a small percentage, but it's important for us to have that in place.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we ready to move on to the next question? Anybody have anything to add? Okay. So at KASAP, and Representative Jenkins started talking about this, jumping ahead of the game. You knew where we were going, but where we see sharing a personal story as an absolute individual choice as a survivor. And we try to inform survivors of the things to consider if they want to share, such as that they don't even have to share their story to advocate for an issue that they care about, even if it's because of a personal experience. as well as they could just share in private and have that conversation that Representative Jenkins is already having with folks. Survivors can say, you know, I want to talk to you about this, but what are you going to do with it? Where's the information going to go? And really set their own parameters and boundaries versus testifying in a committee. To think of any safety concerns as well as any backlash from legislators or the public, and that there can be a power in storytelling. Right. So we want to make sure that folks are fully informed for them to think through the process on their own to see what might fit for them, right? What might be healing or what they're willing to put on the table at this point. So the questions are, from your all's perspective, is it necessary for a survivor to share their story to advocate for an issue? And what would you say are some pros and cons of survivors sharing their stories from a legislator perspective? And with that last piece, I was really thinking about things that you may have seen over there at the legislature after someone has shared a story.
Marcy, this time I'm gonna take the lead in answering your question.
Please do.
Marcy, like all of us, I get a lot of letters over the course of the year. And this particular interim period, I've had regular communication with a young woman on this issue. And I will tell you, Laela, that the biggest gap or the biggest area that doesn't get addressed when we talk about sexual assault goes back to something Samara said. I think Samara made a point that I don't want us to overlook, and that's the issue of date rape. Oftentimes, very little is done by colleges and by prosecutors in the area of date rape. And I've had this young woman, this interim, really pour her heart out to me because she was a victim of date rape. And the college counselor didn't do anything. The college vice president for student affairs didn't do anything. The college didn't do anything. The county prosecutor didn't do anything. And yet you can tell by the series of letters that again, this has impacted her emotionally. It's impacted her self-esteem. It's impacted her mental health. And so obviously these victims have to tell their story. They need to share that with us. But it's incumbent upon us, again, to take action. And I'm going to have conversations with the chair of Julie and my Judiciary Committee, Senator Westerfield, about how we can get prosecutors and colleges to really take this issue seriously. I will tell you, Laela, in 2021, colleges and prosecutors still do not take the issue of date rape seriously.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I would say it's more of the issue of rape and sexual assault in general, because most of the people who are committing these harms are known to them, either partners, ex-partners, family members, acquaintances. But that's why I think one of the reasons we don't see the criminal legal system as the answer, like the main answer to addressing this problem. And that's one of the reasons why we don't see it. But most survivors don't even go to the criminal legal system, but that because there is a gap in there of how things are being addressed. And there was something else you said, you mentioned the universities. So everyone keep your eye out, since you mentioned the university policies on the federal level under Title IX, which is a federal law that protects people from sex-based discrimination in school so that they can have access to an education. And that includes sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and more. So those rules have recently changed, and we anticipate that under the new Biden administration, they will probably change again. That's what we've been told. And then on the state level, there is a campus bill from last session that we anticipate will be coming back for 2022, sponsored by Representative Banta, around some campus student protections. It is geared a little bit more toward making sure that students who are accused of code of conduct violations have certain rights throughout the process. And we have advocated to make sure that students who say that a code of conduct violation happened to them, so if they were sexually assaulted at the university by another student, for example, that they should also have certain rights in this bill. So this would be a state level action. And we have been working well with Representative Vanta. I do want to give her props for all of the times that she's listened to me advocate for additional changes in the bill. But since you mentioned education, that is one that we have on the state level and to keep an eye on the federal level. Okay, so the question is back open.
Well, Laela, I would like to add, if you're a victim or a survivor, or you want to share your story, or you want to have participate in the legislative process, I think Representative Kulkarni brought up a great point, which is, most of the things that I do are because someone told me that it needed to be done. And I know she's had that same experience. And so when you're working in this space of, real hurt and all of us come at it from a different space. I've had very different experiences. I've had a woman who approached me about, being married at 14, and she wanted to outlaw child marriage, and she wanted to be out front with me, and she wanted to be the face, and she wanted to talk about it because Kentucky needed to change that child marriage law. And then I had another woman who came to me about female genital mutilation, and she wanted to be private about it because she didn't want to be ostracized from her community. And she asked if she could retain her anonymity. So myself and all of the others legislators on this call are so sensitive to how people want to roll out their personal stories or how they want to participate in the legislative process for changing things, that, as you said, we're people too, and we will do what you are very comfortable with. But when you come to us with an issue that you really believe needs to be changed, we're on your side. I mean, we'll move heaven and earth to see what we can do to move that issue forward. And we will respect the manner in which you would like to proceed with that. But Representative Kulkarni hit it right on the nose, and that is nothing gets changed unless you share your stories with us. So thank you.
And I'll just piggyback really quick on what Senator Adams just said and say that there's so many different stories. And I want to go back to what Rep. Jenkins mentioned early on with comprehensive age-appropriate sex education, because what boundaries are set as children in terms of what we're comfortable with, what we're not comfortable with. Do we recognize something as assault? Do we recognize it as violence? My threshold and other people's thresholds may not be the same. I may know where to go to get resources and support. Other people may not. There are immigrant experiences, there are cultural barriers, there are language barriers. And if we don't know about these things, then they will never change. And so I think it's really crucial that the stories get told to us. And you should think of us like attorneys or priests, where there's a confidentiality, a duty of confidentiality that we have. And so even if you want to remain anonymous, and it's not necessarily something you want to attribute to a specific person or a name, because there could be fear and danger if that individual is still in a situation where they could be hurt and continue to be hurt. And I think we as legislators absolutely take that on as a sacred obligation and a responsibility to keep that privacy intact and secure. And so I think we will find a way to make sure that story is told as effectively as possible in order to move the policy forward. So I don't think fear of that should be something that stops somebody from sharing their story with us.
Right.
Something I want to this is like the most Samara moment ever, but I want to, I was saying, let's have uncomfortable conversations. I don't want to put survivors in a bad position whatsoever, but I want to kind of talk about what I was meaning by that. Whenever I was working this past session on the Commission on Race and Access to Opportunity, I had to have some uncomfortable conversations because not everyone believes that, being racist is real. I remember looking at one of my colleagues and I said, so you're telling me you've never been treated differently because of the color of your skin? And he was a white male and he was like, well, no, that's not real. I said, well, I get treated differently because I'm a woman. So I'm glad you had that privilege of not being treated differently. And, he just kind of was like, so what I mean by that is let us have uncomfortable conversations with other people. Let us have let us have those conversations with people, because I realize that a lot of the way that we legislate are from our life experiences. And a lot of us are very empathetic and really want to listen. And I think all of my colleagues have said that today, is that we want to be here. We want to be an advocate for you. And if you're not ready to talk, that's okay. We'll share your stories in other ways and however you want to be. But it is important, because I think that sexual abuse it can make people feel uncomfortable, because they don't really know how to react with it, because it's not a common conversation that we have, which is why women and men aren't going and saying, hey, this has happened to me, and so when we can have those conversations become more common. I mean, I don't want to say more common, but I want people to feel like they can talk to us. And so let us, as survivors, talk to us and let us be able to have those conversations for you. I really appreciated whenever we testified on the unemployment bill, we had Dr. Carden. I think this kind of goes into your next one too, Laela. We kind of had Dr. Carden shared a story about, it wasn't a personal story, but it's kind of like a mixed in story to just help legislators understand what was going on. And I realized it really confused some of the legislators, because the story that was shared was about a relationship in the same, and they both worked in the same place. And so she couldn't. And so some of our small business owners, they were like, we really can't help that. Like we try to have policies in place. And, and so it became this, I was like, well, okay, like let's look at it another way. And so I think sometimes when we have more stories in our arsenal to share, it's honestly helpful, because, with that member, Representative Kulkarni and I both sat down with him and kind of talked him through. And it's like, this is just one instance. This isn't a one size fits all. And that's the most important. One sexual abuse survivor that you've met is one sexual abuse survivor. And, so it is important to share your story if you feel comfortable, because that's how we're going to be able, and maybe you're that voice for the person who's not been able to meet a legislator yet, or to feel like they can talk. So
thank you for sharing that. And to add that, folks, don't feel like you have to go by yourself. If you want to bring a friend or family or an advocate from one of our crisis centers and say, I just want you to be on this phone call with me, or follow up, that is something you can call any of our 24/7 hotlines and say, I just want to talk. I just called a legislator and I started sharing my stuff, and now I'm feeling some things and I need to chat it out. That's what our programs are there for as well. So I want to make sure part of that follow-up that I think Representative Jenkins hit on earlier, when another fellow legislator shared on the floor, and that was some impactful sharing. I followed up with her afterwards as well and said, thank you for sharing, and I heard you, and we hear you, and we're here with you. So thank you all for all those pieces. And I hope that folks know that we are all trying to be a support for them if and when they ever want to try to speak their story, or even just push for a change. So we're down to our last few minutes, and we have 2 questions left. The next question, and this goes into what we're dealing with every year at the legislature, is what if an issue that a constituent cares about doesn't move? What can or should a constituent's next steps be?
Crickets.
Well, don't give up. I'll just jump in.
Yes.
Don't give up.
Yeah, don't give up. It took 15 years to pass
don't give
dating violence.
Right. Don't give up. And also, the other thing too is I try to manage expectations, and I always say it is like a perfect storm. If you come to me for an issue and then we create a bill and then it moves through, like that's not the norm. So I think managing expectations and understanding that, there's 38 in the Senate and there's 100 in the House, and that's a lot of education to do on particular things. Going back to everyone's life experiences are so different. So what's important to me is really not important to somebody else, but it's my job to figure out how to make it important for that other person. And so just be patient with us.
Anybody else have any advice on what do we do for the next? We don't give up, we manage expectations, we want to be patient. We know there are a lot of people to communicate with and educate. Anything else?
Well, Laela, Julie's absolutely right. The legislative process is set up to be slow and deliberate and cumbersome. I mean, it's intended to make sure that laws pass slowly so that you don't have these, sudden and radical changes in how we order our lives. And so, it may take years before legislation passes, but that's the way the process is designed. And so you have to be persistent, you have to be consistent, you have to be driven to get legislation passed. And you have to understand it's going to take some time, generally speaking, to get it done.
Great, thank you. So after finishing part 2 of the series, I was re-inspired by the National Survivors Agenda when they posed the following question, and this is going to be the question we end on. So if you were, and so I'm going to give each person a chance to respond, and I think what we'll do is go from Nima and back around to Representative Adams. I'm going to go on the backward way. Then we came in. Or you don't want to be the first one, Representative Kulkarni? I don't have to do it that way. I was thinking trying to be more fair, that you get to answer first.
No, that's okay.
All right.
You did warn us in the beginning, and I should have been thinking about it the whole time.
That's okay. So, and you can answer this question. It can be a one word, just sort of what comes to your mind and your heart. The question is, if you were to imagine a world free from sexual violence, what would that look or feel like to you?
I think that would probably be the only instance where status quo would be okay with me. I think that's what our baseline normal should be, because when you have, and there's a lot more than one word here, so I apologize, but when you have a situation where individuals are weighted down by so much trauma and a burden and the baggage of sexual violence, you don't start off on the same foot as everyone else. And I think just having equal opportunity and a fair shot at life should be the status quo that we all look for and work towards. So I think if there was no more sexual violence in this world, then I think that would be an ideal status quo.
Thank you, Representative Heavrin. $1 million question.
I think I've actually been writing down kind of blurbs, but I think I would hope that we would all feel self-love and self-worth if we didn't have that.
Beautiful. Representative Jenkins.
I think freeing, that women would be free to walk at night by themselves, to go places maybe we don't go now, to not think about where we park, how we carry our keys, whether or not our door is locked, that if we wanted to go out and have an adult beverage by ourselves, we would do it. I think it would be a very freeing society, especially for women.
Yes, and Senator Thomas.
I'm going to go back to where I began this discussion by looking at some of the legislation that Julie has passed. And I would say that kind of world would allow or provide dignity to all. And that's where we really want to go. We want to make sure that everyone receives dignity in our society.
Beautiful. And to close us out, Senator Adams.
I think empowerment. I mean, I just think individual empowerment, and imagine a world where we were all just empowered to do the amazing things that with the gifts that God gave us.
Great. And so I'm adding in the chat as well, just a few of the responses from some of the survivors who participated in that question at one of the town halls, just so people can see that for additional information. But now we're at the end of our time. And this has been an amazing time with the panelists, and we appreciate everyone who joined us to hear this live in person. As I mentioned earlier, it is recorded, and we will be adding it to KASAP's YouTube page by the end of the year. We appreciate each one of you and believe that your voices are powerful. change begins with one person, and we know that each of you can help improve the Commonwealth. Thanks, everyone, and we hope that you have a great night. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laela.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.